Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Virginia for his remarks. I honor our law enforcement officers, as does everybody on the Democratic side. But as I look at the list of bills that Republicans are bringing to the floor this week, I have to say, the American people deserve way, way, way better than this. I mean, Republicans love to talk about supporting the police, but talk is cheap. Look at what they do. There is not a single penny of public safety funding in any of these bills. Not one. I mean, these guys are more interested in passing press releases than they are in passing meaningful legislation that will make a real difference in our communities. And at the same time, Donald Trump's own budget, get this, his own budget calls for massive cuts to programs that support law enforcement. Go read it yourself, Mr. Speaker. The president's budget cuts 55% from burn justice assistance grants. It cuts more than 60% from the COPS program, a program Trump's own Justice Department calls the cornerstone of our nation's crime-fighting strategy. I mean, how is this possible? And let's not forget, mere hours after he was sworn in, on his very first day in office, President Trump pardoned the violent criminals who attacked police officers on January 6th. Now, let me say that again in case anyone forgot. Donald Trump, on his first day in office, pardoned felons who viciously beat police officers at the Capitol building. Now, some of the people he pardoned have since gone on to do even more terrible things, including in my district, where one of them was just rearrested on child pornography charges. So don't come down to this chamber and lecture people on the law and order, okay? The leader of the Republican Party wants to cut funding for public safety after he pardoned his own supporters who violently attacked police. Talk is cheap around here. Look at what the radical far-right people in charge of this government are doing. Look at how they vote, and look at their agenda for this week. Look at their priorities. Another week without a single bill to make life more affordable, without a single bill to address the cost of living. Why not? Well, the answer is simple. Republicans are not focused on your grocery bill. They're not focused on how much you pay at the pump. They're not focused on your rent, your health care, your utility bills, your paycheck. They aren't focused on you. They are focused on their obedience and obsession with Donald Trump, on his tariffs, his war, his billion-dollar ballroom, his arch, his reflecting pool paint job, his golf course on the Potomac. Whatever he wants, they just say yes. And the rest of us pay the price for their radical MAGA extremism. They ripped health care from millions of people in this country. They cut food assistance for kids, veterans, seniors, and Americans with disabilities. They raised the price of everything from utilities to groceries. And they did it all to give tax breaks to their billionaire donors and rubber stamp every dumb idea Donald Trump comes up with. And yesterday, the president said the quiet part out loud. He finally told the truth about something. When asked the simple question, if he thinks about the terrible economic situation that he's put American families into, thanks to his illegal war, you know what he said? Quote, not even a little bit, end quote. Now let that sink in. The President of the United States of America was asked if he cares how badly he screwed up your family's finances with his stupid illegal war. And his answer was not even a little bit. Your gas is $4.50 a gallon. He doesn't care, not even a little bit. Your pay isn't keeping up with inflation. He doesn't care, not even a little bit. Your health insurance is way up. He doesn't care, not even a little bit. Your fridge is empty until payday. He doesn't care, not even a little bit. That is what he said. That is what he believes. And that is how this radical far-right majority in Congress is governing. Those at the top are doing better than ever. The Epstein Class billionaires and special interests who write the campaign checks, They're doing great. They can't thank my Republican friends enough. But the rest of us, for my constituents, for everyday people in this country, Donald Trump's economy sucks. And Republicans don't care, not even a little bit. They tell themselves over and over again that everything is going well. Well, it's time for them to listen to the American people who have had it up to here with these failed economic policies, who are sick and tired of a government that bends over backwards to help those who are well off and well connected and turns a blind eye to the struggles of the working people in this country. We have to do better. We have to do better. And as we come together this week to honor our law enforcement officials, those who serve our communities and protect our communities, the least we could have done is brought a bill to the floor that would actually provide real help to our local police departments to be able to hire people, to be able to obtain the equipment that is necessary to protect our police officers. And instead, we got a press release. We got a press release. Well, anyway, I urge a no vote on this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to my colleague with some interest. It sounds like he doesn't like the current occupant of the White House and has serious concerns about that, but it doesn't sound like he dislikes any of the bills that much because he didn't spend much time talking about them. The bills themselves, and that's what this rule is about, is bringing those bills to the floor. The Milcon VA bill that passed, appropriations bill that passed out of the Appropriations Committee unanimously. And I grant you there were things in there that Democrats didn't like and things in there that Republicans didn't like, but the committee, as we heard last night in rules, the committee came together. They all had to compromise on certain things, but they got the bill done, and they felt like it was overall a good bill. There were certain disagreements, but overall a good bill. And then we're doing some things, and they may want to do more, but we're doing some things that are very positive for law enforcement and for our local communities that will help communities be able to better figure out what's going on, whether it be bail or the monitoring system, et cetera. That's what we're discussing here today. There's lots of time in the leadership hours and in the morning hour to give 1 minute, 5 minutes, or an hour-long speech. But today we're supposed to be discussing during this time period the rule that brings to the floor 4 bills that are good bills and an appropriations bill. So I'm glad to hear that there's not a whole lot of consternation about the bills that we're presenting this rule on. While there may be disagreement on other items, I'm glad that we're moving forward on that. It's always tempting when you're here presenting a rule to get drug into the cesspool or the thoughts that the other side wants to talk about, but that's what I'm here to talk about, the bills that are in the rule that we're presenting today, and apparently they're pretty good. I know they don't like them 100%, but they must be pretty good, or they'd have spent more time talking about them in the opening salvo of this debate on the rule. And so I think that should encourage all members, both Democrats and Republicans, to vote for the rule. And with that, I will reserve the remainder of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would just say to the gentleman, there'll be at least 5 hours of debate to talk about these less than impressive bills that he's bringing to the floor today. There'll be even more time on amendments, a handful of amendments that have been offered. But we're talking about the rule today, and the rule basically is your agenda for the week. And it's not about lowering the price of groceries. It's not about dealing with the high price of gas. It's not about dealing with the rising cost of health care. And so that's your agenda, is to avoid talking about the real problems that Americans are facing as we gather here on the House floor. And I want to talk about your agenda, and your agenda sucks. I mean, I don't know how else to put it more plainly. I mean, it is a disgrace that my Republican friends spend more and more time trying to avoid dealing with the real issues that are hurting their constituents But that's what their agenda is all about. And I get it. Everybody over there is afraid of the guy in the White House. Well, maybe you should be more afraid of your constituents. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to urge that we defeat the previous question. And if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 7711, which would prohibit the use of federal funds to compensate individuals who were prosecuted for their involvement in the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. Mr. Speaker, as you know, it is Police Week, and Republicans will come to the floor, as we have just heard, and talk about how much they support and honor our law enforcement officers. We all support law enforcement officers who keep us safe and protect our communities. But what most, if not all, these Republicans will fail to do, and have failed to do repeatedly, is condemn the pardons that Donald Trump issued to over 1,500 individuals that attacked this building and attacked our democracy on January 6th. Many of them were convicted of violent felonies. For those who weren't here that day, go back and look at the videos, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Over 140 brave Capitol Police, the ones in this chamber now, the ones protecting all of us every single day, were injured. Some tragically died. And what did this president do on his first day in office? He pardoned every last one of those violent offenders. Now, these rioters outrageously are seeking tens of millions of dollars in damages, claiming that the indiscriminate use of force by police officers repelling the attack caused them physical and emotional injuries. Are you kidding me? I mean, where is the outrage on the Republican side over this? What a disgrace. If my Republican colleagues cannot denounce the actions of the president's supporters that day or condemn the pardons, maybe at least they will vote to ensure that these convicted felons aren't awarded millions of taxpayer dollars by the Trump administration as a reward for attacking police officers. And I'll give them a chance to do that with the previous question. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And Mr. Speaker, to discuss our proposal, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Ranking Member McGovern for yielding time to me. If we defeat the previous question, we will offer a bill, my bill, that will truly honor police officers. H.R. 7711, my No Rewards for January 6th Rioters Act. On January 6th, as we all know, violent rioters assaulted Capitol Police, beating them with flagpoles, dragging them through crowds, and pepper spraying them in the face at point-blank range. President Trump has not only called these criminals patriots, he decided January 6th insurrectionists deserved a blanket pardon for their attacks on police officers. Shameful. Now the Trump administration is considering millions of dollars in payouts to these insurrectionists, which is a giant slap in the face to all the brave officers who fought to protect us, and our democracy on January 6th. My bill would prohibit the use of federal funds to compensate any convicted January 6th rioter. Mr. Speaker, if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were serious about honoring police officers, they would take up my bill to prevent President Trump from paying off his favorite cop beaters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to Mr. McGovern.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
The gentleman said something last night, the gentleman from Massachusetts said something last night about having not heard voices on our side of the aisle talking about the pardons, and Mr. Scott said, I had a problem with it, Mr. Scott from Georgia. And then I would remind the gentleman that he and I had a colloquy in the Rules Committee on February 4th, 2025 on that same subject, where I indicated that I had significant concerns about pardoning folks who had assaulted police officers. And so it is not fair, and I don't know, there may have been, I mean, that was something they pulled up because I'm a member of the Rules Committee and brought it up in the Rules Committee meeting because I had made a comment to the media in my home district. I'm sure there are lots of other Republicans who have done the same, raised some concerns, raised some issues, and as a result, the White House came out with some explanations, and people can choose to accept or not accept those. It is what it is, but a number of us did raise concerns about that at the time. Now, that said, we have some bills before us today that are good bills, and that's what we're supposed to be talking about. We've got the bills that deal with monitoring of courts. We've got bail bills that we're dealing with. There are a number of things. We've got a resolution that expresses the Congress support for our law enforcement, which I think we're all in agreement on, and the gentleman said as much, that we all support our local law enforcement and our law enforcement folks out there. And so I would say, folks, let's look at these bills. That's what we're debating now, is whether or not to bring these bills to the floor. I think all the bills that we presented should be brought to the floor. We can talk about other bills on another day, but these bills are appropriately before the House. And then let's talk about the military construction, Veterans Administration funding bill from appropriations, which passed unanimously out of committee. My colleague has indicated that we're offering a handful of amendments. Now, I've managed a couple of these rules before, and some of them have been closed, and he consistently says, and you haven't allowed any amendments. And now he depicts the amendments that we're allowing as a handful. It's a majority of those. In fact, it's a super majority of those that were theoretically in order, and it's 51. Now, by my count, Mr. Speaker, that's 10 handfuls and a little bit more. It's not a handful of amendments, it's 10 handfuls. I'd have to get a whole line of people here to hold on to all these amendments. And we're going to hear debate on them. And we're going to have discussion about it. So it gives you some idea of the hyperbole that my friends on the other side of the aisle are using when you take 51 amendments and depict them as a mere handful. And with that, I reserve the remainder of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you're going to love these guys. I should remind everybody, especially those who may be watching this on TV, that 4 out of the 5 bills that we're considering today are under completely closed rules, number one. Number two, I appreciate the gentleman expressing some concern about what happened on January 6th, and he said that some of them, expressed that they're concerned about the president's pardon publicly. So I just kind of Googled what my colleague from Virginia said, and to his local newspaper, he said, and I quote, he has mixed feelings about the President Trump pardoning those who were charged in connection with January 6th attack on the Capitol. I don't know what the mixed feelings mean, but if my friend were genuinely outraged by what happened that day and by the pardon of these people who violently attacked the police officers that were defending us that day, then I guess my question to the gentleman would be, then why did you vote consistently against hanging a plaque honoring those police officers who protected our lives that day? So, I mean, I find the silence on the other side of the aisle, not only in regard to what happened in this chamber on January 6th, I find it particularly disturbing, but the silence in the aftermath of Donald Trump pardoning all these criminals. And again, we have police officers that were severely wounded. Some ended up losing their lives. And if people believe, I mean, if you have objections and you have concerns, and even if you have mixed feelings, whatever that means, about the president pardoning all these people, then does that mean that the gentleman will support our amendment that we're bringing up here that would prohibit the use of federal funds to compensate individuals who were prosecuted for their involvement in the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021? I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath, but I'm willing to bet that virtually every Republican, if not every Republican, will vote against this amendment. And again, we get a lot of lectures about law and order from Republicans. Let's not forget that, again, the leader of their party, the President of the United States, pardoned over 1,500 of his own supporters who violently attacked this building, including pardons for hundreds of convicted felons who violently and viciously beat law enforcement officers on January 6, sending many of them to the hospital with serious injuries. Donald Trump pardoned every single one of them. Many are repeat offenders who are now back in our communities because of the radical far-right policies of this president and because of the acquiescence and the silence of the party that controls this chamber. I mean, Matthew Huddle, a man with 12 prior criminal convictions, including a shocking case where he pled guilty to brutally hitting his 3-year-old son, leaving bruises all over his child's backside and neck. And after he was pardoned by Donald Trump for the crimes he committed on January 6th, Huddle went back to Indiana, where he was killed during a violent confrontation with law enforcement. A child abuser with a history of violence who put law enforcement in danger again after he was pardoned by Donald Trump. Theodore Middendorf, accused of sexually assaulting a 7-year-old child. This guy pled guilty to this horrific crime in 2024, and he was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But that wasn't all. He also pled guilty to destroying government property and using an American flagpole as a weapon during the Capitol riot. He was pardoned by Donald Trump. Peter Schwartz, a man with 30 prior criminal convictions, 30, including abusing and assaulting his wife, biting her and repeatedly punching her. He was convicted of attacking police officers on January 6 with pepper spray. Another repeat offender, pardoned by Donald Trump. Andrew Tack, who was arrested in 2016 for soliciting a minor online for sex, but his criminal history didn't stop there. He assaulted police officers with bear spray and a metal whip on January 6. Another repeat offender, pardoned by Donald Trump. Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are complicit in these crimes. I mean, thanks to these pardons, we have child sex predators and violent criminals back on our streets. We even have January 6 perpetrators who have been rearrested on new charges after being pardoned. Daniel Ball, a convicted felon because of his involvement in the Capitol insurrection. He was pardoned by Trump on January 20th, only to be rearrested 2 days later on gun charges. I mean, how dare you guys come down here and talk about law and order when you are complicit in these crimes? How dare you come down here and talk about supporting the police after you let out violent criminals who attacked law enforcement officers on January 6th? I mean, I get it. You know, we have different opinions on a lot of issues. But the one thing that should unite us is our praise and our respect for those who defended not only all of us who were here on January 6th, but who defended our democracy. And because the guy in the White House, you know, doesn't want anybody to acknowledge that that was a terrible day, everybody just caves. Everybody caves on the other side. And so I raised this, and I don't have any mixed feelings about that, about what Trump did. I think it was outrageous. And I think most Americans that I talk to, and I think most Americans across this country don't have mixed feelings. They think what happened that day was outrageous. These guys should not have been pardoned. Some of them should still be in jail. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, if I am to be pilloried on the floor of the United States House, let us get the facts correct. First, I'm sure that WJHL, a television station, would not appreciate being called a newspaper. Second, let me read you the full quote. Griffith, I have mixed feelings. I personally think that some of those folks who assaulted police officers deserve some of the time they got. So if I'm going to be pilloried, there's what I said. And the following week in the Rules Committee, in response to questions from my colleague, I responded, I did not have every case in front of me. Speaking of pardons, it is a difficult decision, and I would have had a hard time pardoning people who assaulted police officers on any occasion. So if I'm to be pilloried, let's get the record straight, and I think the same would be true for many of my colleagues on this side of the aisle. Now let's talk about violent criminals, because we have a bill in front of us today that will deal with that. We have the charitable, phraseology is the charitable bail funds. We have a bill in front of us that will treat them as insurance. And people may think at home as they're watching this, what in the world do bail bonds have to do with insurance? Well, having been a criminal defense attorney, I can assure you that the insurance is that to ensure that people show up for their court dates. And that's what bonds are for. If you put up a bond, an insurance company usually writes that if it's a corporate surety bond, and that's usually what you have. Sometimes you have property bonds, and there are other ways of doing it. But if you have a corporate surety bond, or a group comes forward and puts the money up for you, that group ensures that you will be present in court, or you forfeit the amount that you've put forward. And that's all fine and good, and we got charitable groups out there, and if they're looking at cases where you have people that can't afford it, but it's not a violent crime or something where there's a danger to the public, I understand that, and that's what the bill does, is it says we're going to treat them like they're insurance companies, because they are in fact stepping into the shoes of an insurance company. It's not grandma who's putting up her house, which many of my clients had their grandmas put up their house to guarantee they'd be present in court when they were supposed to be there to be tried for their offenses. But they're acting like the corporate surety bonds. They're stepping into those shoes, and they ought to be treated accordingly under the law. And then we heard a whole litany, and I really didn't want to get into it, a whole litany of things that people did who were, doing bad things on January 6th and did some bad things afterwards as well. But I point out also that that's not before us at this very minute, but what is before us is a bill on these charity bonds. And when people are released on cashless bonds, and when people are released on cashless bonds or artificially low bail, they have a greater propensity to reoffend, as I said in my opening. And because I feel compelled, for example, in Wisconsin, Darrell Brooks was released on a $1,000 bond after running over a woman with a vehicle despite a lengthy criminal history and an additional outstanding warrant. Brooks was previously charged with aggravated battery and had an outstanding warrant in Nevada after skipping bail for a sex-related crime. And then, on November 21st, 2021, Brooks drove through a Christmas parade, injuring over 50 individuals, killing 6, one of whom was an 8-year-old child. A March 2023 study, which I mentioned before, by researchers at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, found that approximately 72% of violent felony offenders who were released without bail were rearrested. So we could stand here and go through hours of this, but Mr. Speaker, we have before us a good number of bills that deal with trying to make our communities a little bit safer, giving people more information, trying to make sure we're getting it right, trying to help our police officers and our local communities be safer. These are all good bills. They may not do everything that everybody wants, but these bills before us in this rule that we're presenting are good bills. And then we have the Milcon VA bill, which passed out of the Appropriations Committee unanimously, 58 to nothing. And I believe that we should pass these bills. And first step in doing that is passing the rules so we can bring the bills to the floor with set time for debate. There'll be plenty of time for debate, time on the Milcon VA bill to go over amendments, and to then consider as a House, as the House for the United States, whether or not we want to pass them. I think we should. But first step, we got to pass this rule. I urge my colleagues to all vote yes to bring these bills to the floor. And my colleagues on the other side can debate whatever deficiencies they may see in the bills and have their time to tell the American people about those bills. But I really wish they would focus, when we're talking about a rule, on the rule to bring the bills to the floor and not all these other matters. Now, I understand they want to talk about other things. I get it. That's the role of the minority. But as the majority, we need to pass this rule. And I urge my colleagues to do so, and I reserve the remainder of my time. But, Mr. Speaker, I would also advise that whenever my colleagues are ready, I am prepared to close.
The member reserves. The member from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, let me apologize to the TV station that I called a newspaper. What a terrible sin, and I appreciate the gentleman's clarity in reading that I have mixed feelings because some of the people deserve some of the time. Boy, that's really strongly worded condemnation. But I'm going to disagree with the gentleman on one thing he said, and that is that somehow this is not on the agenda today. The gentleman just read off what the Republican agenda was and the votes that the Republicans want us to consider on the floor today. I urge that we defeat the previous question. Our staff handed your team the amendment that we want to vote on. That will be the next vote that we have, by the way, will be on whether we would prohibit the use of federal funds to compensate individuals who were prosecuted for their involvement in the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. I'm happy to, I guess that's the next vote. So people are going to have to vote yes or no on that, and it is in front of us. So I don't really understand why the gentleman would say that it's not in front of us, and I'm happy if he wants to support what we're trying to do here and make sure that the people who viciously attacked Capitol police officers on that day on January 6th, that threatened the lives of those who work here, that destroyed all of this property that is well documented. All this is on video. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman if he would like to endorse what we're trying to do, so maybe we can agree on something. Okay, well, I guess I'm not going to get that support. Again, and Mr. Speaker, again, the next vote, let me again remind people, will be on, on whether or not we want to prohibit the use of federal funds to compensate individuals who were prosecuted for their involvement in the attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. The President is hinting that maybe he would be favorable to compensating some of these people who are responsible for the terrible crimes on that day. I find that sickening, quite frankly. He wants to give money to criminals, to people who attacked our democracy, who beat up our police officers, and yet he doesn't want to give money to our police officers, as I pointed out in the beginning. Not a penny in any of the bills, there's not a penny contained in any of these bills to actually help support our local police officers. And let me also bring us back to what I think this debate is all about. And really, it is about priorities. This is another wasted week. And the debate is really about what Republicans are not doing, what they refuse to do. It's about their wasted time in the majority, their total failure to bring up legislation to help everyday people. People are begging us, they are begging us to do something about inflation. They're pleading with us to bring grocery prices down, to lower gas prices, to make life more affordable, to stop the war and reverse the tariffs that are eating into their paychecks and killing their finances. And what do Republicans prioritize week after week after week after week? Billionaire tax breaks. loopholes for the rich and powerful, giveaways to giant corporations and the price gougers and the big donors who line their pockets with campaign cash. Listen to me, America. These guys promised to lower your prices on day one. It's year two, for God's sakes. And who are you going to believe, them or your empty wallet? Republicans have done nothing to lower your costs. Their agenda does nothing to help everyday people. Their bills do nothing for working families. Their leader said so on TV yesterday. He doesn't even think about how his reckless, illegal vanity war hurts your pocketbook. He thinks about his arch. He thinks about painting the reflecting pool. He thinks about his golf course on the Potomac River. He thinks about bailouts for foreign governments and corrupt, shady deals that enrich his inner circle. He thinks about his ballroom. Boy, does he bring that up every day. He wants $1 billion of your money for his tacky ballroom. But when it comes to helping you, when it comes to helping your family, when it comes to the medical bills piling up on your kitchen table, when it comes to figuring out how to keep your fridge full until your next paycheck, he told us the answer himself. He doesn't care, not even a little bit. I urge a no vote on this rule, and I yield the balance of my time.
Member yields the balance of his time. I will remind members that they are to direct their remarks to the chair and not to a perceived viewing audience. The member from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have before us the Milcon VA bill. For folks watching at home, I should translate military construction at our bases and Veterans Affairs, which is our VA hospitals, et cetera. That's what this rule has in it. It also has a number of bills related to law enforcement, making things better, the monitoring systems, the bail systems, cashless bonds, et cetera. These are good bills, and the rule ought to be passed, as I said before. I would be remiss if I didn't speak about the fact that this is Police Week. It's one of the reasons why we have these bills and others in front of us. And this year, and unfortunately it has happened before since I've been in office, an officer was killed in the 9th Congressional District. Officer Hall was killed in an inmate attack at the North River Correctional Center in Independence, Virginia, which is in Grayson County. In November of last year. 2 additional officers were attacked at that time. Both are physically doing okay. But Mr. Speaker, I don't know how you ever get over an act of violence where you witness a colleague, a friend, a brother in law enforcement being murdered. That's really what we're about this week. And this rule promotes 4 bills that will help. Doesn't solve everything. Doesn't resolve everything. But Jeremy Hall will be remembered in another resolution coming up this week that we'll be voting on to honor fallen law enforcement officers. We can also honor them all by taking these steps forward in trying to make our system better, in recognizing that you probably ought not let violent felons, people who've already committed crimes, out on either no bond or low bond, that you probably ought to make sure that the folks posting the bonds are capable and available to actually ensure the presence of the defendant at trial. And I left this out earlier, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize because it's a big part of the bail system, it's also to ensure their good behavior while out on bond. So it's both presence on the court date and good behavior between the time the bond is posted and the time of that court date. And what the data shows us is, without one of these bills, there's an increase from 62% to 72% of recidivism. That helps our police officers and honors those who've been wounded physically or psychologically while serving in law enforcement, and those who answered the last call, like Officer Hall. I hope my colleagues will vote to put this rule forward. I urge the passage of the rule and the underlying legislation. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The member yields back the balance of his time. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
The member from Massachusetts is recognized.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the member from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1274 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 74, House Resolution 1274. Resolved that Section 11 of House Resolution 1224 shall have no force or effect.
The member from Minnesota is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only, and I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection. So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Minnesota is recognized.
The rule before us today is simple. 2 weeks ago, the Rules Committee met to provide for consideration of the Farm Bill, H.R. 7567, in addition to H.R. 1346, the Nationwide Consumer and Fuel Retailer Choice Act. Nothing in this rule changes that. Instead, the rule before us makes a procedural change, which will allow H.R. 1346 and the Farm Bill both to be transmitted to the Senate separately for their consideration. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1346. For too long, the people of Western Minnesota, along with families and farmers across the entire country, have been subjected to frustrating, outdated, and unnecessary regulations. Currently, our growers are subjected to patchwork regulations that effectively ban the sale of E15 during the summer months. The summer ban is a direct hit to the American taxpayer. It limits consumer choice, drives up prices at the pump during the height of the summer travel season, and restricts the market for homegrown biofuels. Because of these antiquated rules, farmers have been forced to rely on temporary, short-term emergency waivers that create confusion rather than progress. The legislation before us today changes that. It includes text for permanent, year-round E15 to finally provide the certainty that our agriculture and our energy sectors deserve. We are moving past the era of temporary fixes and towards a future of long-term stability. The benefits of E15 are clear and backed by significant data. First, this is a major win for American consumers. E15 is a lower-cost fuel option, typically priced 20 to 40 cents per gallon less than regular unleaded gasoline. In a time of fluctuating global energy markets, providing this relief is a necessity for hardworking Americans. In fact, E15 adoption would save American drivers an estimated $27 billion a year on gas purchases, putting roughly $200 back into the pocket of the average American household annually. Second, this is a win for our national security and energy independence. Ethanol is produced within American borders by American workers. Every gallon we blend is a gallon of oil we do not need to import from foreign countries. By leaning into domestic production, we are strengthening our energy independence and reinforcing our commitment to American-made energy. The American people understand this. 80% of citizens believe renewable fuels like ethanol are necessary for our energy independence, and 71% support increasing the availability of E15 to help lower prices. And year-round E15 is a massive win for the American farmer. In Western Minnesota, our corn growers are large supporters of the biofuels industry. They deserve a fair and consistent market for their product. Full adoption of E15 would increase corn consumption by 2.4 billion bushels, supporting our rural communities and ensuring steady, predictable demand year-round. Beyond the farm, the economic impact is staggering. Full E15 adoption would add $25.8 billion to the U.S. GDP and support an additional 128,000 full-time jobs. Beyond the economic and agricultural benefits, H.R. 1346 provides essential regulatory and market certainty. It enhances fuel supply chain stability and improves certainty for the entire fuel industry by eliminating unfair advantages for some refineries over others. By reforming the small refinery exemption process, this bill helps the Environmental Protection Agency set renewable fuel standard annual volumes in a timely, transparent, and fair manner. It removes the reoccurring tension between refiners and agricultural stakeholders, allowing everyone from farmers to fuel retailers to better plan for the future. It is important to address the technical advancements of vehicles since the current regulations were created. E15 is legally approved for all vehicles built since 2001 or later, which accounts for more than 96% of the cars on the road today. Furthermore, E15 burns cleaner, reduces emissions that harm our health and our environment. Mr. Speaker, We cannot afford to keep hitting the pause button on American energy every summer. This legislation removes the hurdles that have stifled E15 for decades. It gives farmers the confidence they need to plan, and it gives consumers a lower cost option when they need it most. The American people are calling for solutions. This bill provides more choice at the pump and lower prices for America. It is real savings and real money back in the pockets of hardworking Americans. It is time for a permanent, nationwide solution that supports our growers, lowers costs for families, and reinforces our commitment to American-made energy. And I urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying legislation. And Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The member from Minnesota reserves. The member from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentlelady from Minnesota for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The member from Massachusetts is recognized.
So, Mr. Speaker, this rule is what happens when you try to make a deal by telling people what they want to hear. It's what happens when you come to an agreement by telling one group of people one thing and another group of people the total opposite. That is the situation that Speaker Johnson finds himself in. He can't keep his word to his own members, can't manage his own conference, can't figure out how to pass a bill, and apparently can't keep his story straight between the two groups he was negotiating with. The incompetence takes my breath away. We are now wasting floor time to basically undo something Republicans did last week, to unattach an E15 bill from the Farm Bill after Republicans had us vote to attach an E15 bill to the Farm Bill. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. That's what this is all about. Shady backroom deals falling apart because Republican leadership can't keep its word and just hope that everything would somehow work out and nobody will notice anything. You know, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy used to do the same thing. Promise everything to everyone, cut one side deal after another, hope nobody noticed, and how did that work out for him? So maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson here. If you're going to make a deal, make an honest deal. If you're going to write a bill, know what is in the bill. And if you're going to promise your members something, maybe don't come back three weeks later and say, actually, never mind. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised that some of my Republican colleagues from the Midwest are going along with this strategy. Because if you think separating E15 from the Farm Bill will help you get what you want, I have a degree from Trump University for you. This is not some brilliant legislative maneuver. It is a quick way to make sure the Senate never takes it up. And the reason, and I know this is because of the way the bill is written, the reason why this doesn't have much of a future is because, get this, this bill will cost over $2 billion. $2 billion, billion with a B, and none of it is offset. So, like, what happened to the deficit hawks? $2 billion, basically, that just is going to be added to the debt. And it'll be debt on arrival in the Senate, and I think everybody knows that. But if I represented a corn-producing state, I would not be thrilled that my leadership took one of my top priorities, pulled it out of a bill that possibly had a chance to move, and said, trust us. I mean, I don't know whether the gentlelady read the rule, because it sounded like a little bit confused here, but here's the rule. It's one sentence. It doesn't talk about bringing E15 to the floor. It doesn't allow for there to be a debate or an amendment on an offset so that we don't add $2 billion to the credit card. It basically just is a rule that will detach E15 from the Farm Bill. That's it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't feel particularly comfortable if that's all that we were doing today. That's all that the bill was accomplishing. What we have here is a majority that cannot manage its own conference, cannot keep its promises. and cannot pass its own agenda without completely breaking into disarray. And the American people see this. They see a Republican majority that spent weeks fighting with itself over the Farm Bill. They see a Republican majority that cannot decide whether E-15 belongs in the Farm Bill, outside the Farm Bill, attached to the Farm Bill, detached from the Farm Bill, or shoehorned into something else. They see a Republican leadership that panders to the American people, talking about lowering costs and inflation, and then does none of it. But here's the thing. Republicans are bad at governing because they do not actually believe in governing. They believe in power for the sake of power. They believe in theatrics. They believe in blaming everybody else, but when the time comes to do the basic work of this House, they fall apart. They block amendments. They shut down debate. They cut food assistance and health care while protecting the rich and powerful. They fund Donald Trump's vanity projects while families are getting crushed by the cost of groceries, rent, gas, and medicine. And they know that their agenda is unpopular. And that is why they're not trying to earn people's votes anymore. They've given up on that. Instead of changing their agenda, they're changing the rules of democracy itself. Instead of earning votes, they're rigging maps. Instead of persuading people, they're silencing them. Instead of serving voters, they're choosing their voters. Just look what's happening across this country. Donald Trump demanded that red states start gerrymandering so Republicans can cling to power in this House, and Republican politicians lined up to do it. The hell with democracy. The hell with what the people want. Very different story in states like Virginia, where they actually had a vote on the new maps. People voted. And guess what? Voters approved a redistricting plan to fight back against the staggering Republican assault on our democracy. A narrow majority on the Virginia Supreme Court tossed it aside. An awful, awful decision, in my view. And now the United States Supreme Court has taken another wrecking ball to the Voting Rights Act, a law that for generations helped protect many communities from having their voices diluted and their power stolen. Well, guess what, Mr. Speaker? We are not going back to the days of Jim Crow. Too many people have fought too hard for equal representation in this country. And a party that is confident in its ideas does not need to make it harder for people to vote. A party that is proud of its record does not need to dilute people's representation. A party that knows how to govern does not spend its time making shady side deals and begging courts to save it from voters. But this Republican majority is not confident, not proud, and sure as hell not competent. Case in point, today's rule. A rule to undo just one more mess of their own making. Mr. Speaker, the American people deserve a hell of a lot better than this. I reserve my time.